everyone, and welcome to a special Cygnus Destroyer episode. This video marks a very important date. It was on this day 30 years ago that the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES as it's more commonly known, was released in North America. The NES is my favorite system of all time, and it's had a huge impact on my life. I knew that I had to celebrate it in style, and that's exactly what I'm gonna do. So let's take a virtual trip back to the 80s for a look at the 17 games that were available at launch. As previously addressed, the NES had a limited test release in the US on October 18, 1985, but it wasn't available nationwide until the following year. The 17 launch titles came in sleek black packaging and were placed into different categories such as sports and action. Since they're the least interesting to me, I'm going to start off with the sports series, which initially consisted of baseball, golf, tennis, and 10-yard fight. Baseball is, well, baseball, and while it's primitive now, it was quite advanced for the time. It's lacking the MLB license, so there aren't any professional athletes, and the teams are generic and identified by a single letter, but that didn't bother me. It's baseball, nothing more, nothing less. Golf doesn't fare as well. The overall presentation captures the spirit of the sport with multiple club options and course conditions that have to be taken into consideration. However, the controls felt clunky to me. There was one point where I got stuck in a sand hazard and I couldn't get out for the life of me. It's neat that Mario is our avatar on the green, but that didn't keep this from feeling bland and forgettable. Speaking of Mario, he returns as a judge in tennis. Tennis is okay. Visually, it excels by 1985 standards, but the controls are again a bit rough. It took me a little while to get the serve down, and returning the ball became a recurring problem. The majority of my hits would cause the ball to fall dead to the ground. Due to this, I got slaughtered by the computer, but at least I got one in on him, so I'll consider that a victory. 10-Yard Fight is a football game that deviates from its peers by not being named after the sport it's based on. I'll admit that I don't know jack about football, so I really had no idea what I was doing. My cluelessness meant that I didn't get much enjoyment from 10-Yard Fight, but I'm sure there's enough here for fans of the sport to get a kick out of. The Light Gun series made use of the signature zapper, which required tube TVs to function, meaning that these are impossible to play for everyone but CRT owners. Even then, they don't always work the best. Case in point, I have 3 zappers and 3 CRTs, and I was barely able to get them to register. I messed around with the brightness settings and even took the gun apart for a cleaning, and it didn't really improve the performance, sadly. Under the right circumstances, Hogan's Alley, Wild Gunman, and Duck Hunt can be very fun, dishing out hot pixelated lead on criminals and the titular birds. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to capture that in my footage, but trust me when I say they're a blast. Moving on to the other original pack and accessory, the Robot series utilized the Robotic Operating Buddy, aka Rob. The robot would normally be plugged into the second port, and the first would send signals to it, causing it to take action in gyromite and stack up. I own a Rob, but I don't have any of the necessary pieces to hook him up. Luckily, Nintendo programmed the A and B buttons on the second controller to substitute for Rob and gyromite. From what I've read, Rob is slow and clunky to react, so I guess this is for the best. Gyromite is a fun puzzler, focusing on Professor Hector and the dastardly Smix. Hector has to collect the dynamite while avoiding the Smix, and the difficulty increases as the levels progress. Factor in the excellent music from Hirokazu Tanaka, and we have one of the best early entries in the console's library. In stark contrast, Stack Up isn't much of anything, especially without Rob. The player's only task is to provide signals for the robot, which are sent out by Hector hopping on all the blocks within a row. Left. Right. When that happens, Rob moves one of the pieces, but since I don't own any, nothing was accomplished. Needless to say, Stack Up isn't worth the price unless you're a completist collector. Right. Close. Down. Open. Gyromite, on the other hand, is cheap, and I absolutely recommend picking up a copy. Excitebike, Mach Rider, and Wrecking Crew make up the programmable series, which allowed the player to create levels and courses from the pre-existing elements within each title. Mach Rider and Excitebike were both motorcycle racers, but the former added shooter elements to concoct a futuristic sci-fi adventure. Wrecking Crew brings Mario back into the mix, and he has to smash walls, ladders, and other objects with a hammer while avoiding fireballs and enemies. There's a lot to offer with all three of these, but my personal favorite is Mach Rider, if only for the Rush reference. If the music wasn't so good, I would have queued up Temples of Syrinx and rocked out with the Canadian Power Trio. Up next is the Education series, or rather the Education single game, Donkey Kong Jr. Math. In it, we take control of Donkey Kong Jr. and we solve math problems. The layout is akin to the original Donkey Kong Jr., except that there are numbers located on the climbable ropes and symbols on the platforms. DK Sr. holds up a solution and Jr. has to create the correct mathematical formula to match it. As a learning tool, it's pretty straightforward and basic. Ultimately, Donkey Kong Jr. Math didn't sell that well, and it, along with Stack Up, is now quite rare and expensive. If anyone out there actually wants to try this out, I would suggest emulating it. It's amusing for all of a few minutes, and then it gets dull. Closing out this video is the main attraction, the Action series, which featured a lot of variety. The fact that pinball was part of the lineup is proof of that. Similarly to baseball, pinball is primitive in comparison to what followed in the genre, with the absence of a table tilt ability sorely missed. Regardless, it's still a decent pinball experience, and it has a cool bonus section with Mario and Pauline, so that's a plus. Another oddity in this category is Clu Clu Land. Clu Clu Land is hard to describe. From what I surmise, the goal is to uncover the gold items to make a picture. This is performed by circling the fish around the post, then moving on to the next. The D-pad has to be held in a certain direction to revolve around the post and release to let go, and the button to press to do so changes with the orientation. I was barely accustomed to it at the conclusion of my session, but even with my amateur skills, I found Clu Clu Land to be quite enjoyable. Quirky, but enjoyable. Ice Climber may be more known now from Smash Brothers, but their roots go back to this vertical platformer. The Eskimo has to bash out a path with his hammer in order to ascend up various mountains. Once the path is cleared, the character has to leap up to the next section to repeat the process, which is tougher than it sounds because the jumping can be tricky. Ice Climber has a couple issues for sure, but they don't keep it from being cute and fun. The final entry in the genre at the time of the console's launch was Kung Fu from Irem. Kung Fu stars Thomas, a martial artist who has to rescue his girlfriend Sylvia from the evil Mr. X. Kung Fu is a fast-paced thrill ride, and excelling at it requires quick reflexes, simulating the feeling of being a Kung Fu master. Enemies approach from the front and behind, and Thomas has to kick and punch his way through them in order to be reunited with his love. Kung Fu is short, but it provides a decent challenge, so it has a lot of replay value. Kung Fu is exceptional, and it still holds up today. That wraps up my look at the 17 initial NES releases. Some of you may be wondering why I haven't mentioned Super Mario Bros. The reason that I haven't is because there's uncertainty as to the date it hit stores in the US. Some sources claim that it was on the 18th, but others say that's not the case. Regardless, even without that masterpiece, Nintendo's 8-bit machine was off to a strong start and the future was very bright. That future included the Action set, which I received when I was 8, and I subsequently spent spent countless hours playing Mega Man 2, Castlevania 3, and Bucky O'Hare. My fondest memories from childhood involved the NES, and reconnecting with it as an adult led me to this very moment on YouTube. The NES had a huge impact on my life, and it's made me the happiest I've ever been because of it. That's why I now give a big salute to this wonderful console. Thank you, Nintendo and your entertainment system for 30 magical years, and here's to 30 more to come. Thanks for watching, everyone. If this is your first experience with me and my videos, well then I hope that you liked what you saw, and if you want to see more, click that red box right there on the bottom, and that'll subscribe you to the channel, and you'll be able to keep up to date with all my current content. But besides that, you can watch these videos on the screen right now. It's a sampling of my NES-related videos. Like I said in the video, the NES is my favorite console of all time, so the majority of my content is NES-related, so here's just a sampling of that, so check that out. Now, in the upper left-hand corner, that is my video on the rare NES games. Games like Surprise the Dinosaur Peak and Little Samson and Panic Restaurant. Games that are really good for the most part, but they're also quite expensive these days, so I determined if they really are worth what people are asking for them in that video. So check that out by clicking on the upper left-hand box. Right next to it is an episode from my series Innocent Till Proven Guilty, and this particular one is on Super Mario Bros. 2. Yes, the black sheep of the Mario family, if you will, at least for the NES. Some people consider it to not be a true Mario game because of its origins. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that. So watch that video to see what I feel about it and see what my verdict is on it, if it's innocent or guilty. So check that out. Now, in the bottom left-hand corner, that is an episode from my series, The LJN Defender, and this one is on Friday the 13th. That is a game that has an even worse reputation. Some people think that game is really bad, but I, for one, really like that game, so I decided to stick up for it, and that's what I do on that episode. So check that out by clicking on the bottom left-hand box. Now, with that out of the way, come back next week for another Cygnus Destroyer Top 10, but until then, I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye!